Social distancing. What a phrase. Not one that we've heard much before this week, or at least that I remember hearing much before this week. Social distancing. Creating space between us in order to keep us safe and healthy, or at least as much as possible. I'll be honest, before this week, I would have said that the phrase social distancing and the gospel as we know it don't seem to go together very well, don't seem complementary of each other. Actually, they kind of seem mutually exclusive, social distancing and the gospel. Because Jesus was all about community, bringing people together, bringing communities together, moving beyond the things that typically divide us and finding what it is that unites us. Not a union based on fear or anxiety, but a union based in love. So social distancing. Some people, I do know, are distancing out of fear, out of anxiety, or simply because it's what we've been told to do. If you're like me, that kind of distancing doesn't feel right. There's some angst and discomfort in it. It doesn't feel faithful to me. Being afraid of each other, afraid of our neighbors, suspicious of every sneeze or cough, it isn't very life-affirming. It isn't the life that Jesus invites us into, I think. Being afraid and anxious leads to even more distancing, greater separation, more isolation, more suspicion. And we've seen in the past in different scenarios like we're in right now, the more isolation and the more distancing can also lead to discrimination and division and fear. Social distancing. It doesn't seem to be what Jesus was about. Because Jesus was all about community, coming together. And so I've struggled with this phrase, social distancing, all week. Every time I heard it, I had a kind of this discomfort and angst, the whole notion of distancing ourselves from one another. I was reminded of Matthew 18, verse 20, when Jesus said, "Where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there among you." Where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I'm there among you. For me, the scripture is foundational for what it means to be Christian. It's in community that Jesus joins us. It is when we connect with each other that we experience Christ. And so I struggled with the encouragement to stay apart, to distance ourselves from each other. You should see our sanctuary right now. No one is within 5 feet of each other. There is space, lots of space. So this sense of social distancing seems counter to sermons and messages that I have given in 20 years of ministry about coming together. And then finally, I found a sense of peace. Really, in about 2 aspects of this social distancing, I was able to find a sense of peace. Because we know that the call for social distancing has a purpose. There's a why. And the purpose is to minimize harm. I can get behind that. Minimize the spread of COVID-19 as much as possible. Minimize the spread, the impact, minimize the number of cases, keep people safe and healthy. If you've been watching the news all week like I have, the number of graphs and charts used by doctors and experts this week was enough to get lost in. And especially if you're someone who loves numbers and graphs and charts, man, you can just get lost in all of the information and the speed at which it's changing and trying to stay up to date with the latest information. And in that process of getting lost in the numbers and the graphs and the charts, it's almost easy to forget that each number represents a person. Each number represents a story. Each number represents a community of loved ones. each and every number on all of those charts and graphs is more than simply a number. And so we distance ourselves with the intention of minimizing the harm. And when we do that, social distancing actually becomes an act of love, an act of caring. It becomes an act of community. It's the way we join together. It's kind of a different form of community. And community is central to our lives. From the very beginning of creation, there was community. In the first creation story in Genesis chapter 1, God said, "Let us create humankind in our image." In the image of God, God created humankind. From the very beginning, God was an us, a we. God is community. And so Jesus told the disciples that when two or more are gathered in his name, he is there. I had to remind myself this week that Jesus didn't say, when two or more are gathered in person less than 5 feet apart, that's when Jesus is present. This idea of social distancing in order to care for one another, it calls us to reimagine community, to go beyond the norms of our everyday lives and reach beyond what is familiar and comfortable and how we know how to do this. Just as we are doing now, live streaming worship for the first time, trying something new, figuring it out, working to stay connected even in the midst of the distance. I'll be honest, I'll miss shaking your hands this morning and sharing words of greeting and making eye contact and smiling and connecting in all those usual ways that we connect on a Sunday morning. I'll miss it. But at the same time, I wonder if we, and I mean a bigger we than St. Luke's, I wonder if we've become so comfortable in our routines that we've failed to live into the fullness of community sometimes. Perhaps it's not a bad thing that social distancing has come into our vocabulary. Perhaps it's good if it causes us a little discomfort. Perhaps if we let it, it will get us out of the rut of taking each other for granted. Perhaps it will invite us to appreciate one another more. Perhaps it will challenge us to think of new ways to find community even in the midst of the distance. Maybe it's not bad that we're going to have to work at it in a new way. Perhaps it will encourage us to slow down, to be present, fully present with those who are within 6 feet of us. I hope it invites us to get a little creative. When the usual ways of being together are no longer available, can we resist that urge to isolate and distance even more, and instead commit to finding ways to connect? Whether it's over the phone or Skype or social media or picking up groceries for a high-risk neighbor who can't go out, finding toilet paper for those who are almost out right now because none of us thought it would be the hot commodity that it seems to be at the moment. Perhaps you can be the voice of calm, low anxiety in your workplace or neighborhood or family, wherever you might find yourself this week, offering community in a different way. Jesus said when 2 or 3 are gathered, but he didn't specify what that gathering would look like. Social distancing. In this moment, social distancing is an act of love. It is the way we honor the sacred worth of all people. It is the way we value community. Throughout our scriptures, through the stories that formed our faith tradition, we are often offered 2 paths. One is a path paved with fear and anxiety, and it leads to isolation even when we're surrounded by people. And the other path is one paved with love and hope and faith. And it leads to community even when we are distancing ourselves from one another. social distancing. It's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity for us to figure out new ways of connecting. We're all going to have to do that, and we're going to be in communication, and our staff is going to work to figure out what it means to be St. Luke's in the next couple weeks. I'm kind of excited. I think there's potential, possibility, when we're grounded in faith and love. So I want to end with a prayer floating around Facebook this week by Cameron Baum. It goes like this. May we who are merely inconvenienced remember those whose lives are at stake. May we who have no risk factors remember those most vulnerable. May we who have the luxury of working from home remember those who must choose between preserving their health and making their rent. May we who have the flexibility to care for our children when their schools close remember those who have no options. May we who have to cancel our trips remember those who have no safe place to go. May we who are losing our margin money in the tumult of the economic market remember those who have no margin at all. We who settle in for a quarantine at home remember those who have no home. As fear grips our country, let us choose love. During this time when we cannot physically wrap our arms around each other, let us yet find ways to be the loving embrace of God to our neighbors. In this time of social distancing, may we turn all of our acts into an act of love, grounded in the faith God offers. Amen.